The Confrontation. The emergency lights cast crimson shadows across the metal walls of Ganymede Research Station as Captain Lyra Winters pressed her back against the cold steel, one hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. 8 months pregnant, and here she was, facing down the galaxy's most feared warriors. The irony wasn't lost on her. 3 Zarketh raiders blocked the corridor ahead, their crystalline armor refracting the red emergency lights like pools of blood. Their insectoid features remained impassive, but Lyra could sense their uncertainty. They hadn't expected to find a pregnant human woman guarding their objective. Last warning, human, the lead Zarketh clicked in accented standard. The research dies here. Along with anyone protecting it. Lyra's fingers brushed against the neural interface at the base of her skull. Iris, status, she subvocalized to her AI companion. Data purge at 89%, Captain, Iris responded in her mind. Requiring another 3 minutes to complete deletion of all genome therapy research. Lyra allowed herself a small smile. Well then, gentlemen, I suppose we'll have to do this the hard way. The lead Zarketh raised his particle rifle, but Lyra was already moving. Her neural augments kicked in, flooding her system with controlled bursts of adrenaline. Pregnancy had slowed her down, but 15 years of special operations training didn't disappear overnight. She dove behind a research console as energy bolts scorched the air where she'd stood. Her hand found the emergency panel she'd prepared hours earlier, yanking it open to reveal a cluster of shock grenades. The human female is augmented, one of the Zarketh warned. Extreme caution advised. You have no idea, Lyra muttered, triggering the first grenade. The device skittered across the floor, erupting in a blast of electromagnetic energy that shorted out the Zarketh's targeting systems. Their crystalline armor, designed to deflect energy weapons, acted as a conductor for the EMP pulse. 2 of the warriors staggered, their systems temporarily scrambled. But the leader pushed through, his modified armor adapting to the surge. He charged forward, mandibles clicking in fury. Lyra had anticipated this. The next grenade wasn't electronic, it was chemical. Dense smoke filled the corridor, obscuring infrared and visual sensors alike. She heard the Zarketh curse in their native tongue as she moved, years of training guiding her through the darkness. Captain, Iris warned, your heart rate is elevated beyond safe parameters for your condition. Not now, Iris, Lyra gritted her teeth, reaching the secondary access panel. Her fingers flew across the keypad, inputting the override sequence she'd memorized. The floor beneath the Zarketh warriors suddenly retracted, dropping them 10 feet into a containment chamber below. Emergency force fields snapped into place, trapping them in a cage of energy. Lyra allowed herself to breathe, one hand steadying herself against the wall as the smoke began to clear. The baby kicked, as if registering its mother's tension. Deletion complete, Iris announced. All research data regarding Project Genesis has been purged from station servers. Good, Lyra straightened, approaching the edge of the containment pit. The Zarketh leader stared up at her, his compound eyes reflecting the emergency lights. You don't understand what you're protecting, he said, his voice carrying an edge of desperation that surprised her. The hybridization research, it will destroy everything. The natural order must be preserved. Lyra placed her hand on her belly, feeling the gentle movement within. The natural order is change, she replied. Evolution. Adaptation. The barriers between our species were never meant to be permanent. Then you doom us all, the Zarketh leader's mandibles clicked in resignation. A distant explosion rocked the station, causing Lyra to stumble. Iris? Multiple Zarketh vessels have breached the station's outer defenses, the AI reported. Security forces are engaged, but we have approximately 18 minutes before they reach this sector. Lyra nodded, her mind already mapping escape routes. Time to go. She turned to leave, then paused, looking back at the trapped warriors. The containment field will fail when the station's emergency power runs out. That gives you about an hour. I suggest you use it wisely. She moved quickly through the corridors, her neural augments helping her maintain balance despite her changed center of gravity. The station's laboratories passed in a blur of shattered equipment and abandoned workstations. Download complete to secure drive, she asked Iris. Affirmative. The backup of Project Genesis is contained within the quantum storage device, as planned. Though I still question the wisdom of maintaining any copy, given the risks. Sometimes the greatest risk is losing hope entirely, Lyra replied, reaching the emergency shuttle bay. She'd prepared for this contingency, knowing the Zarketh would eventually track her here. As she began the shuttle startup sequence, her mind drifted to 6 months earlier, when she'd first discovered the truth about Project Genesis. She'd been assigned to routine security oversight at the facility, but her augments had detected anomalies in the research data. Patterns that shouldn't have existed. The scientists weren't just studying alien DNA, they'd found a way to bridge the genetic gap between species. To create viable hybrids that could share the best traits of both human and alien physiology. It was the key to ending centuries of biological warfare and forced segregation between species. The Zarketh, self-appointed guardians of genetic purity, couldn't allow that to happen. Warning, Iris interrupted her thoughts. Multiple hostiles approaching shuttle bay. Estimate 3 minutes until breach. Lyra's hands flew across the controls, bypassing safety protocols. Hang on, little one, she whispered to her unborn child. This is going to get interesting. The shuttle's engines hummed to life as emergency klaxons blared throughout the station. Through the viewport, she could see the stars beyond Ganymede's horizon. Somewhere out there, answers waited. About the project, about her pregnancy, about the future of human-alien relations. But first, she had to survive. Hidden truths. The shuttle rocketed through Ganymede's thin atmosphere, its hull groaning under the strain of the emergency launch. Lyra's fingers danced across the controls, her neural augments processing trajectory calculations faster than any normal human pilot could manage. 3 Zarketh pursuit craft detected, Iris announced. Their energy signatures suggest they're equipped with latest generation particle cannons. Of course they are, Lyra muttered, banking the shuttle hard to port. The baby kicked in protest at the sudden movement. Sorry, little one. Mama's got to focus right now. The vast expanse of Jupiter filled the viewport, its swirling storms a reminder of nature's raw power. Lyra had chosen this route deliberately, the gas giant's intense radiation would help mask their signature. Captain, Iris's tone carried an unusual note of concern, your biometrics indicate elevated stress levels. The child. The child will have to be as tough as its mother, Lyra interrupted, executing another evasive maneuver as energy bolts streaked past the shuttle. Now, about that backup plan we discussed. The AI hesitated for a microsecond, an eternity in computer time. The theoretical risks of quantum tunneling while pregnant are. Theoretical being the key word, Lyra said, her hand moving to the experimental drive controls she'd installed weeks ago. Sometimes you have to roll the dice, Iris. The pursuing Zarketh vessels were closing fast, their superior engines giving them a clear advantage. But they didn't know about the modifications Lyra had made to her shuttle, using technology that technically didn't exist. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar calm of combat settle over her. Initiate Protocol Omega. The shuttle's conventional engines cut out as the quantum drive spun up, creating a localized field of distorted spacetime. For a moment, reality itself seemed to blur around them. Then they were elsewhere. The shuttle emerged in the shadow of Europa, Jupiter's ice-covered moon now between them and their pursuers. Lyra allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction, even as her stomach churned from the experimental jump. Quantum tunnel successful, Iris reported. Though I feel compelled to note that this technology is highly unstable and technically illegal in 17 star systems. Add it to my list of crimes, Lyra replied, already plotting their next move. Status of the research data? Secure. However, the AI paused again. Captain, I've completed my analysis of Project Genesis. There are elements of the research you need to know about. Specifically regarding your pregnancy. Lyra's hands stilled on the controls. She'd suspected there was more to her condition than she'd been told. The timing had been too convenient, discovering the hybrid research just weeks after learning she was pregnant. Tell me. The project wasn't just about creating a bridge between species, Iris explained. It was about creating a new kind of humanity altogether. One capable of surviving the changes coming to our galaxy. Your child, it carries modified genes. Adaptations that shouldn't be possible. The baby moved again, as if responding to Iris's words. Lyra placed a hand on her belly, feeling the life within. You're saying my child is part of the project? That someone engineered this? Not exactly, Iris replied. The modifications appear to be naturally occurring. As if evolution itself is trying to tell us something. Your pregnancy may be the first documented case of spontaneous human-alien genetic integration. Lyra absorbed this information, her tactical mind already analyzing the implications. It explained the Zarketha's desperate attempts to stop her. If humans could naturally adapt to share traits with other species, their entire philosophy of genetic purity would crumble. A warning light flashed on the console. Multiple ships dropping out of FTL, Iris announced. Signatures match Coalition vessels. The Coalition? Lyra frowned. The interspecies peacekeeping force wasn't supposed to know about Project Genesis. How did they find us? Unknown. But they're broadcasting on a secure frequency. Captain, they're asking for you specifically. The largest of the Coalition ships moved into view, a massive cruiser bearing the distinctive markings of the scientific division. Its very presence here violated multiple treaties. Open the channel, Lyra said, straightening in her seat despite her exhaustion. A familiar voice filled the shuttle's cabin, one she hadn't heard in nearly a year. Captain Winters, Admiral Marcus said, his tone carrying a weight of authority that even retirement hadn't diminished. I believe it's time we discussed your role in a much larger game. Lyra's mind raced. Marcus had been her mentor in special operations before his supposed retirement. If he was involved with the Coalition. Why didn't you tell me, she asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Because, Lyra, he replied, using her first name for the first time in years, some truths can only be discovered, not taught. Your pregnancy isn't an accident. It's proof that our species is ready for the next step. The Zarketh know this. That's why they're willing to start a war to stop it. The baby kicked again, stronger this time. Lyra closed her eyes, remembering all the signs she'd ignored. The strange readings during her checkups. The way her neural augments had begun functioning at unprecedented levels. What happens now? Now, Marcus said, you learn why the Coalition really exists. And why your child might be the key to preventing a war that could tear the galaxy apart. Whispers of betrayal. The Coalition flagship, Eternal Dawn, was a masterpiece of interspecies engineering. As Lyra's shuttle docked in its cavernous bay, she couldn't help but admire how the ship's design incorporated elements from a dozen different species architectures. It was unity made manifest in steel and energy. Your neural patterns indicate increased anxiety, Iris noted as Lyra prepared to disembark. Should I initiate a calming protocol? No, Lyra replied, checking the quantum storage device containing Project Genesis one final time. I need to stay sharp. Something about this doesn't feel right. Admiral Marcus waited in the docking bay, flanked by a mixed escort of human and alien Coalition officers. Age had turned his hair silver, but his posture remained military straight, his cybernetic eye glowing faintly as it scanned her approach. "You're looking well, Captain," he said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "The pregnancy suits you." "Cut the small talk, Admiral," Lyra responded, one hand instinctively moving to her belly. "You've got a lot of explaining to do." Marcus nodded, gesturing toward a nearby corridor. "Walk with me. What we need to discuss shouldn't be overheard." As they moved through the ship's winding passages, Lyra noticed subtle details that set her instincts on edge. The security cameras tracked their movement too precisely. The crew they passed seemed too deliberately positioned. "The Coalition has been monitoring genetic drift across species for decades," Marcus explained as they walked. "We noticed the first signs of spontaneous adaptation 15 years ago. Small changes at first, humans developing resistance to alien diseases, alien species showing increased compatibility with human technology." "Natural evolution," Lyra suggested, but Marcus shook his head. "Too fast for natural selection. Something was accelerating the process. Then we discovered Project Genesis, and everything started making sense." They entered a secure briefing room, its walls lined with holographic displays showing genetic sequences. "Your child isn't the first attempt at hybridization, Lyra. It's just the first successful one." The displays flickered to life, showing failed experiments, genetic dead ends, and finally, her own medical scans. The complexity of the data was staggering. "Iris," Lyra subvocalized, "are you seeing this?" "Affirmative," the AI responded. "But Captain, these records are inconsistent with the Project Genesis data we retrieved. The timestamps don't align." Lyra's combat instincts flared. "Admiral, you still haven't explained how the Coalition knew about the project. Or why the Zarketh are so determined to stop it." Marcus's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on her. "Because, Captain, they understand what we've known all along. This isn't just evolution, it's guided adaptation. Someone, or something, is deliberately pushing our species together." The baby kicked sharply, and Lyra winced. The movement felt different this time, more purposeful. She noticed Marcus watching her reaction with too much interest. "The real question," he continued, "is whether humanity is ready for the truth. The Zarketh believe we're not. They think knowledge of guided evolution would tear society apart." "And what do you believe?" Lyra asked, though she was already reaching for the concealed pulse weapon in her jacket. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his organic eye. "I believe in being on the winning side of history." He touched a control panel, and hidden doors slid open around the room. Armed soldiers entered, not Coalition troops, but private military contractors. "I'm sorry, Lyra. But Project Genesis is too valuable to leave in the hands of idealists." "Iris, Protocol Sigma." Lyra shouted, dropping into a defensive stance. The room's lights flickered and died as the AI hijacked the ship's systems. "You always were my best student," Marcus sighed, drawing his own weapon. "But you never learned when to stop fighting." The first shots illuminated the darkness like lightning, but Lyra was already moving. Her neural augments kicked in, processing combat data faster than ordinary human reflexes could manage. She fired twice, taking down the nearest mercenaries with precision shots. "The project isn't just research," she called out, ducking behind a console. "It's proof that we're meant to change, to grow beyond these artificial boundaries we've created." "It's a weapon," Marcus replied, his cybernetic eye cutting through the darkness. "The most powerful one ever created. Whoever controls the next step of evolution controls the future of every species in the galaxy." More mercenaries poured in, their weapons set to stun. They wanted her alive, needed her alive, she realized. Her and her child. "Iris, how long until their systems come back online?" "Approximately 40 seconds, Captain." But I've detected additional complications. The Zarketh fleet has found us. Multiple vessels on intercept course. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. The very aliens they'd been running from might now be their only chance at escape. You can't stop this, Marcus, Lyra said, preparing for her next move. Change is coming whether we're ready or not. You're right, he replied, his voice closer now. That's why we need to control it. The ship shuddered as the first Zarketh weapons struck its shields. In the chaos that followed, Lyra made her choice. Sometimes, she realized, the enemy of your enemy could be something else entirely, a catalyst for the very change they all feared. Convergence point. The eternal dawn shuddered under another barrage of Zarketh weapons fire. Emergency lights pulsed through the darkened briefing room as Lyra rolled behind a fallen console, her neural augments struggling to track multiple threats at once. Their shields are at 47% capacity, Iris reported in her mind. The Zarketh are specifically targeting weapons and propulsion systems. They're not trying to destroy the ship, they want to board it. Perfect, Lyra muttered, squeezing off another shot at Marcus's mercenaries. Just what we needed. A three-way fight. Her former mentor had taken cover near the room's main exit, his cybernetic eye casting a red glow through the smoke. Think about what you're doing, Lyra, he called out. The coalition may be corrupt, but we're still humanity's best chance at controlling this evolution. That's your problem, Marcus, she replied, feeling her child move restlessly within her. You still think this is something we can control. The ship rocked again, and Lyra used the moment of distraction to make her move. She sprinted toward the secondary exit, her modified genetics giving her speed that surprised even the augmented mercenaries. But Marcus had anticipated her. The floor panel beneath her feet suddenly electrified, sending her stumbling. Her neural implants flickered, momentarily disrupted by the surge. Marcus emerged from cover, weapon trained on her. I taught you better than to run in predictable patterns, he said, approaching cautiously. Now, let's discuss this reasonably. The child you're carrying is too important for. He never finished the sentence. The hull behind him exploded inward as a Zarketh boarding pod breached the ship. Crystalline warriors poured through the breach, their weapons already firing. Lyra didn't waste the opportunity. She rolled to her feet, one hand protectively over her belly, the other drawing her backup weapon. Iris, status of the quantum drive? Online but unstable, the AI responded. The recent combat damage has affected calibration. Attempting a jump now would be extremely dangerous. More dangerous than this? The briefing room had become a war zone. Marcus's mercenaries exchanged fire with the Zarketh warriors while Marcus himself disappeared into the chaos. Through the breach, Lyra could see more boarding pods approaching. Then something unexpected happened. Her child kicked again, but this time it was different. A wave of something rippled through her consciousness. For a brief moment, she could sense them all, the humans, the Zarketh, their fears and hopes and desperate desires. Iris, she gasped, are you reading this? Affirmative, the AI's voice held a note of awe. Your child's neural pattern is interfacing somehow. The hybrid genetics aren't just physical adaptations. They're creating new forms of consciousness. A Zarketh warrior turned toward her, weapon raised. But it hesitated, its compound eyes studying her with what looked like recognition. In that moment of connection, Lyra understood what Project Genesis really was. They were wrong, she said softly. All of them. This isn't about controlling evolution or preserving genetic purity. It's about breaking down the barriers between us. All of us. The ship's intercom crackled to life. All hands, this is Admiral Marcus. Initiate Protocol Omega. Repeat, Protocol Omega is now in effect. Captain, Iris's voice held urgent warning, they're powering up some kind of energy pulse. Quantum signatures suggest it's designed to target specific genetic sequences. They were going to try to eliminate the hybrid genetics, not just in her child, but in anyone showing signs of adaptation. Marcus had chosen his side. The Zarketh warrior was still watching her. Slowly, deliberately, it lowered its weapon. Others followed suit, their crystalline armor catching the emergency lights like prisms. "Your kind fears change," the warrior spoke in halting standard. "We feared it too. But fear is not wisdom." More explosions rocked the ship as the remaining Zarketh vessels engaged the coalition fleet that had just arrived. Through the breach, Lyra could see the gas giant Jupiter hanging in space, its eternal storms a reminder that chaos and order were two sides of the same coin. "Iris, can you access the ship's quantum pulse controls?" "Negative. They're on a closed system." "But..." The AI paused. "Your neural pattern is changing. The hybrid genetics are adapting in response to stress. You might be able to interface directly." Lyra felt it, new pathways opening in her mind, connections she'd never imagined possible. Her child moved again, and this time she understood. They weren't just carrying hybrid genetics. They were becoming something entirely new. "I need your help," she said to the Zarketh warrior. "All of your help. What's coming next? It's bigger than any of us." The warrior touched its crystalline breastplate in what she somehow knew was a gesture of agreement. "The stars themselves whisper of change," it said. "We will listen." Unity's dawn. The eternal dawn's corridors had become a maze of shadow and light, emergency systems casting everything in a blood-red glow. Lyra moved through the chaos with newfound purpose, her unlikely alliance of Zarketh warriors flanking her protectively. Each step brought fresh waves of sensation as her enhanced consciousness touched the minds around her. "The quantum pulse is powering up," Iris reported. "Estimated 3 minutes until Marcus can initiate Protocol Omega. Captain, your neural patterns are becoming increasingly erratic." Lyra pressed a hand against the wall to steady herself. The baby's movements had become more insistent, each kick sending ripples of awareness through her consciousness. She could feel them all, the fear of Marcus's mercenaries, the rigid determination of the Zarketh, and somewhere ahead, Marcus's own desperate conviction. "He believes he's saving humanity," she said softly to her Zarketh companion, whom she now knew as Karthak. "He can't see that humanity's already changing. We all are." "Change brings pain," Karthak replied, its crystalline armor humming in harmony with the ship's vibrations. "But resistance brings destruction." Another explosion rocked the ship. Through the nearest viewport, Lyra could see the space battle unfolding, coalition ships exchanging fire with Zarketh vessels while civilian craft fled the combat zone. So much destruction, all because of fear. "Iris, status of the ship's neural network?" "Partially accessible. The hybrid genetics appear to be enhancing your neural augments beyond their design parameters. You may be able to interface directly with the ship's systems, but the biological stress could trigger labor." Lyra smiled grimly. "Sometimes the universe has its own timing." She turned to Karthak. "I need you to get me to the quantum core. And I need your people to stop firing on this ship." The Zarketh warrior touched its breastplate. "It is done. But Marcus's warriors still block our path." Not for long, Lyra closed her eyes, reaching out with her expanded consciousness. She could feel every mind on the ship now, each one a unique pattern of thought and emotion. Including the mercenaries ahead. She didn't try to control them, that would make her no better than Marcus. Instead, she shared with them what she felt, the possibility of a future without barriers, without fear, without the endless cycle of conflict. Some turned away, but others lowered their weapons, stepping aside. The quantum core hummed with deadly purpose as they entered the massive chamber. Marcus stood at the main control panel, his cybernetic eye glowing like a dying star. "I wondered if you'd make it," he said without turning. "The pulse is almost ready. One burst of targeted quantum energy, and this evolutionary experiment ends. We go back to being what we were meant to be, separate, pure, unchanged. Look around you." Lyra gestured to the Zarketh warriors, to the mercenaries who had joined them. "This is what we were meant to be. Connected. Unified. The barriers between species were never meant to be permanent." Pretty words, Marcus's organic eye flickered with something like regret. "But nature doesn't work that way. Species remain separate for a reason. What you're becoming, it's an abomination." The baby kicked again, and this time Lyra didn't fight the wave of awareness that followed. She let it flow through her, into the ship's systems, into the minds around her. Even into Marcus. He staggered, his cybernetic implants sparking as they encountered something they were never designed to process. What are you doing?" "Showing you the truth." Lyra approached the control panel, her movements sure despite the pain beginning to pulse through her body. "We're not losing our humanity, Marcus. We're expanding it. Evolution isn't a straight line, it's a web, connecting all life in ways we're only beginning to understand." The quantum pulse controls responded to her touch, not through physical contact but through the new pathways in her mind. She could see the code, the energy patterns, the potential for either destruction or transformation. "Iris," she gasped, feeling the first real contraction hit, "help me redirect the pulse. The genetic stress is accelerating your labor," the AI warned. "This is extremely dangerous. Everything worth doing is." Lyra placed both hands on the console, letting her consciousness merge with the ship's systems. She could feel Marcus raising his weapon behind her, could sense Karthak moving to intervene. "Don't," she said to both of them. "Just watch." The quantum pulse built to its crescendo, but instead of targeting the hybrid genetics for destruction, Lyra reshaping it. Through her connection to the ship, through her child's emerging abilities, through the very changes Marcus feared, she turned it into something else entirely. The pulse rippled outward, washing over everyone in the chamber. For one eternal moment, all barriers fell away. Human, Zarketh, hybrid, they felt each other's minds, each other's hearts, each other's truth. Marcus's weapon clattered to the floor. "How?" he whispered, his cybernetic eye leaking fluid that might have been tears. "How did we not see?" "Because we weren't ready," Lyra said, sliding to her knees as another contraction hit. "But we are now. The baby was coming, here in this place of transformation." Karthak moved to support her while Iris coordinated with the ship's medical systems. Above them, through the chamber's viewport, the battle had stopped. Ships hung motionless in space as their crews experienced the same revelation. "The pulse," Iris reported with something like wonder in its artificial voice, "it's accelerating the natural genetic changes. Not just here, but everywhere it reaches. The barriers between species, they're becoming permeable." Lyra laughed through the pain. "Not becoming," she said. "They always were. We just needed to remember." Her child was born as the pulse faded, a daughter with eyes that held both human depth and Zarketh crystalline clarity. A living bridge between worlds that had only ever been separated by fear and misunderstanding. As the newborn's first cry echoed through the chamber, Lyra felt minds awakening across the ship, across the fleet, across space itself. Not to a loss of identity, but to an expansion of it. Not to chaos, but to a deeper order. "What do we do now?" Marcus asked, looking at the child with wonder rather than fear. Lyra held her daughter close, feeling the future pulse with possibilities. "Now," she smiled. "Now we evolve. Together."